You shouldn't be here. The thought arrives with perfect clarity, cutting through the fog of exhaustion that's plagued you for the past 16 hours. Your legs ache. Your fingers are stained with ink and parchment dust. The data slate you're carrying feels like it weighs as much as a small child, though you know it doesn't. But these discomforts, the everyday torments of an adept serving in the outer administrative wings of the Imperial Palace, suddenly seem trivial, distant. Because you've just realized something that makes your blood turn cold. You shouldn't be here. The corridor you're standing in is wrong. Not wrong in the sense of being forbidden, though it almost certainly is, but wrong in a way that your hindbrain, that ancient seat of human survival instinct, recognizes immediately. The ceiling is too high. Not cathedral high, not the vaulted majesty of the ecclesiarchy's grandest temples. Too high in a way that serves no aesthetic purpose. Too high for humans. The walls are too far apart. The proportions are designed for something larger than you, something that would find your dimensions cramped and uncomfortable. The air itself is different here, thicker. You can feel it pressing against your skin like warm water. It carries smells that don't belong together. The sharp tang of sacred oils that cost more than your family's annual earnings, layered over incense that's been burning continuously for longer than your civilization has had written language. Beneath that, something else. Something organic and vaguely medical, like the antiseptic smell of a chirurgeon's theater, but older, much older, as if the stone itself has absorbed centuries of what? Surgery, transformation, genesis. Your footsteps echo, they shouldn't. The floors of the administrative wings are carpeted with threadbare runners that swallow sound. Here, your boots strike marble, no, not marble, something harder. Something that gleams with veins of gold when you look down, though you don't remember making the conscious decision to look. The echo of your steps travels down the corridor and doesn't come back. It's swallowed by distance that seems to go on forever. How did you get here? You try to remember. There was an emergency lockdown, something about a security breach in the sub-tertiary vaults. You'd been delivering documents to the Office of Tithe Assessment, 3rd Sub-Level Eastern Wing. Routine work, mind-numbing work, the kind of work that makes up 99% of life in the Imperium, moving information from one place to another, maintaining the vast bureaucratic machinery that keeps a million worlds turning. Then the alarms, not the screaming klaxons you'd hear during a genuine emergency, but the soft, insistent chiming that meant certain corridors were being sealed. Certain routes were being closed, and you'd been in the middle of your route when it happened. You'd taken a turn, then another, trying to navigate back to familiar territory, but the corridors had shifted or seemed to shift. What should have been a left turn back to the main transit ways had somehow led you deeper into the palace's labyrinthine heart. The Imperial Palace is not one building. It's 1,000 buildings, 10,000. A city-sized complex that has grown organically over millennia, built and rebuilt, expanded and renovated, until it's become a maze that defies human comprehension. There are administrative wings where 3 generations of the same family have worked without ever seeing the same corridor twice. There are sections that predate the Imperium itself, tunnels and chambers that were ancient when the Emperor first united Terra. You are in one of those ancient places now. You know this with absolute certainty, though you couldn't explain how. And then you see the door. It's open. Just slightly, just enough. Doors in the Imperial Palace don't simply stand open. Every entrance is guarded, locked, warded, monitored. Security is not just a protocol, it's a religion unto itself. But this door, massive, ornate, covered in scrollwork that hurts your eyes to look at directly, stands ajar. Golden light spills through the gap, warm and inviting and utterly, utterly wrong. You should turn around. You should run. Every instinct you have is screaming at you to flee, to find a commissar, to report this breach of protocol and let someone else handle it. But you don't. You can't. Because you hear water running, the gentle splash of liquid into a basin, and beneath that sound, something else. Something that might be breathing, though it's too deep, too controlled, too measured to be entirely human. Your hand is on the door before you realize you've moved. The metal is warm under your palm. Not the warmth of human touch, but the warmth of a living thing, as if the door itself has a pulse. You push, and it swings inward with perfect, silent grace. No creak, no resistance, as if it's been waiting for you. The chamber beyond is not large. This surprises you. You'd expected something grandiose, something that matched the impossible proportions of the corridor. But this is almost intimate, a private space. There's a basin carved from a single piece of what looks like marble, but probably isn't. Probably something infinitely more rare and precious. Water flows into it from a mouth carved into the wall, the face of some ancient Terran deity you don't recognize. The water is crystal clear and catches the light in a way that seems to produce more illumination than it should. And beside the basin, bent forward, helmet removed and set carefully on a nearby surface. That's when you see him, the custodian. Your brain doesn't process it all at once. It can't. The human mind isn't designed to take in something that perfect, that inhuman all at once. Instead, you see fragments, pieces, like trying to look directly at the sun and only catching glimpses between protective blinks. Golden armor. You see that first because it's familiar. You've seen custodians before from a distance during parades and ceremonies. The auramite plate that covers them from neck to toe, worked with such artistry that each suit is a masterpiece worth more than most planets. But you've never seen it from this close. Never seen the way it seems to drink in light and give it back transformed. Never noticed the microscopic inscriptions that cover every square inch. Names you realize dimly. The names of every custodian who has fallen in the Emperor's service, inscribed so small that no human eye could read them, yet somehow you know they're there. Hands. His hands are bare, cupped under the stream of water. They're too large. Not grotesquely so, not like an abhuman's or a mutant's. Just too large in the way that makes your sense of scale slip sideways. The proportions are perfect, mathematically precise, but they're not human proportions. These are the hands of something built to different specifications. The fingers are long and elegant, and you can see the way the muscles move under skin that looks like porcelain in the golden light. There are scars, thousands of them, tiny white lines that crisscross the knuckles and palms, evidence of countless centuries of combat. But they're neat scars, surgical scars, as if even his wounds heal according to some predetermined pattern. And then, because you're human, because you can't help yourself, because your eyes have nowhere else to go, you look up. You see his face. Time stops. You'll remember this moment for the rest of your life, however long that turns out to be. You'll remember the exact way the light caught the water droplets falling from his chin, the way steam rose in gossamer threads from his skin, as if his body temperature runs several degrees hotter than human normal, the way your own breath caught in your throat, trapped there, unable to escape. The face is beautiful. That's your first thought. It's beautiful in the way that great art is beautiful, in the way that a perfectly forged blade is beautiful. Every line is exactly where it should be. The bone structure is flawless, with high cheekbones and a strong jaw that would make any sculptor weep with envy. The skin is pale, not sickly pale, not the pallor of someone who lives underground, but pale like marble, like alabaster, like something precious and carved. But it's wrong. The proportions are off, not obviously, not in a way you can point to and say, there, that's not human, but in a way that makes something deep in your hinterbrain recoil. The eyes are too large, set just slightly too far apart. They're gold, not hazel or light brown with golden flecks. Gold, actual metallic gold, and when the light hits them just right, you can see that there's something behind the iris, membranes that flicker and adjust like a camera lens focusing. His pupils contract and expand in ways that don't match the ambient light. They're responding to something else, processing information your eyes can't even see. The symmetry is too perfect. Human faces are asymmetrical. It's one of the things that makes us human. One eye slightly larger than the other. One side of the mouth that quirks up higher when we smile. The nose that breaks just slightly to the left or right. These tiny imperfections are the signature of natural growth, of genetic lottery, of lives lived and injuries survived. This face has none of that. It's mirror perfect. mathematical. Each side is an exact reflection of the other, down to the molecular level. It's the face of something that wasn't grown but engineered. And behind that perfection, in those golden eyes, you see something that makes your heart break. Exhaustion. Not the exhaustion of a long day's work or even a sleepless week. This is the exhaustion of eons, of millennia spent in unceasing vigilance, of watching ages pass while remaining unchanging. You see it in the infinitesimal tension around the eyes, in the set of the mouth, in something ineffable and terrible that transcends mere physical expression. This being is tired in ways you cannot begin to comprehend. And then, throne preserve you, he notices you. The moment stretches. Your heart, which had been hammering against your ribs like something trying to escape a cage, simply stops, or feels like it does. Your lungs freeze mid-breath. Every muscle in your body locks solid, as if you've been flash frozen where you stand. He doesn't move quickly. He doesn't need to. He simply turns, straightens, and looks directly at you. The full force of his attention is like standing in front of a blast furnace. You can feel it as a physical pressure against your skin, against your mind. Those gold eyes focus on you with an intensity that makes you want to look away, to close your eyes, to do anything but meet that gaze. But you can't. You're paralyzed. A small animal caught in the gaze of an apex predator. The silence is absolute. You can hear your own pulse in your ears, a frantic drumbeat that sounds obscenely loud in the quiet. You can hear the water still trickling into the basin, each droplet distinct and crystalline. You can hear your own breath when it finally, shudderingly resumes. But you cannot hear him breathe. You cannot hear his heartbeat. He stands there, 7.5 feet of genetically perfected warrior, and he makes no sound at all. He exists in silence, as if he's somehow stepped outside the normal flow of cause and effect. How long do you stand there, locked in that terrible moment? Seconds, minutes, hours. Time has lost all meaning. There is only now, this eternal now, you and him, and the knowledge that passes between you without words. You have seen something forbidden. You have looked upon a face that should never be revealed. You have glimpsed behind the mask of divinity and seen the terrible, tragic truth beneath. When he finally speaks, his voice is not what you expected. You'd imagine something booming, something that would shake the walls and make the water in the basin ripple with its force. But it's not like that. His voice is quiet, almost gentle, deeper than any human voice should be, but controlled, measured. Every syllable perfectly enunciated, as if speech itself is another form of combat and he's been trained to precision. You should not be here. It's not an accusation, not a threat. It's simply a statement of fact delivered with the same weight as water is wet or stars burn. You open your mouth to respond, to apologize, to explain, to beg for your life, but nothing comes out. Your tongue is thick and useless in your mouth. He watches you struggle for words. His expression doesn't change, or does it? Is that the faintest flicker of something in those eyes? Not anger, not irritation, something worse, something that might be pity. The lockdown protocols, he says, still in that quiet, measured voice, were meant to prevent precisely this. He pauses, reaches for his helmet. For a moment, a brief, irrational moment, you think he's going to put it back on, that he's going to cover that terrible face, and somehow that will make this all go away, that you'll be able to unsee what you've seen. But he doesn't put it on. He just rests one hand on it, those two large fingers curling around the golden metal with easy familiarity. The gesture is almost human, almost sad. You took a wrong turn, he continues. In the eastern stairwell, you should have descended, not ascended. The signage is deliberately confusing in times of lockdown. It is meant to guide loyal servants away from sensitive areas. His head tilts slightly, regarding you with those inhuman eyes. Most find their way back without issue. Some do not. The words are courteous, professional. But beneath them, you hear the truth. This has happened before. This happens periodically over centuries and millennia. Some poor soul gets lost in the endless maze of the palace, takes a wrong turn, passes through a door that should have been locked, and sees something they shouldn't. You are afraid, he observes. Still no emotion in his voice. Still that terrible gentleness. That is appropriate. Your body understands what your mind has not yet fully processed. And he's right. You are afraid, more afraid than you've ever been in your life. More afraid than when you were 6 years old and the hab block you lived in caught fire and you had to be carried out by a guardsman while flames licked at your heels. More afraid than when you thought you'd failed your administrative exams and would be shipped off to a factory world to live out your days in industrial servitude. This is primal fear, ancient fear, the fear of prey animals when they realize the predator has seen them. What? Your voice comes out as a croak. You swallow and try again. What happens now? It's a stupid question. You know what happens now. But some part of you, the part that still believes in miracles, in mercy, in the fundamental benevolence of the Imperium, needs to hear him say it, needs confirmation. He's quiet for a long moment. The water continues to run. You can see steam rising from his skin as if he's radiating heat like a forge. When he speaks again, there's something in his voice that might be regret, might be. It's hard to tell. Reading emotion in that perfect engineered face is like trying to read emotion in a statue. You cannot leave, he says simply. Not now, not ever. The words fall like hammer blows. Each one lands with physical force, driving the air from your lungs. You hear yourself make a sound, a small, broken sound that might be the beginning of a sob or a laugh or just the noise that humans make when everything they are shatters at once. I understand your distress, he continues, and that's somehow worse, that he understands, that he recognizes your humanity even as he tells you that your life is over. I wish it were otherwise. But you have seen what cannot be seen. You know what cannot be known. The protocols are clear. They have been clear for 10,000 years. 10,000 years. The number sits in your brain like a stone. 10,000 years of this. 10,000 years of lost souls stumbling through wrong doors. 10,000 years of this same conversation, this same terrible moment repeating like a nightmare that never ends. There is no malice in this, he says, and you almost laugh at that. Almost. Because how can there be malice? Malice requires emotion. Malice requires hatred or anger or some kind of personal investment. This is nothing personal. This is protocol. This is necessity. This is the grinding machinery of imperial security doing exactly what it was designed to do. You are not a person to him. Not really. You are a problem, a variable that needs to be corrected, a thread that needs to be cut before it unravels the tapestry. Please, you hear yourself say. The word comes out small and broken. I won't tell anyone, I swear. On the golden throne, on the emperor's name, I swear I won't. I know. He cuts you off, not harshly, not unkindly, just with the flat certainty of someone who has heard these exact words countless times before and knows exactly how meaningless they are. I know you believe that, he continues. I know you intend it, but intention is insufficient. The human mind is not designed to contain certain truths. They leak. They show in your eyes when you see another custodian. They shape your words when you speak of the imperial household. They color your dreams and infect your thoughts. You cannot help it. It is not a failing. It is simply what you are. His hand is still resting on his helmet. You watch his fingers tighten almost imperceptibly as if he's restraining some impulse you can't name. You are wondering, he says, what is so terrible about a face? Why such extreme measures? Why must the price be so high? You nod because yes, that's exactly what you're wondering. Beneath the fear, beneath the certainty of your own impending death, there's curiosity, desperate, clawing curiosity. If you're going to die for this and you are, you know you are, then you want to understand why. Something shifts in his expression. It's minute, microscopic, but it's there. His eyes, those terrible golden eyes, close for just a moment. When they open again, there's something different in them, something that might be decision or resignation. Or both. Sit, he says, gesturing to a bench carved into the wall. If you are to die for this knowledge, then you will at least understand what you have seen. Your legs are moving before your brain catches up. You stumble to the bench and collapse onto it, your data slate clattering to the floor and forgotten. The custodian, this being who has just casually pronounced your death sentence, moves with fluid grace to stand before you. He's still holding his helmet. He looks at it for a long moment, as if seeing it for the first time, or perhaps seeing it for the 10,000th time and still finding new details to contemplate. "Do you know what children are taught about the custodian guard?" he asks. You shake your head mutely. "We are taught to be angels," he says. His voice takes on a quality that might be mockery, might be bitterness, it's hard to tell. Golden angels, the Emperor's personal companions, living legends who stand vigil over humanity's greatest treasure, perfect, incorruptible, eternal. He sets the helmet down on the edge of the basin with a soft clink of metal on stone. "These are necessary lies," he continues. "The Imperium requires symbols, it requires heroes. It requires something to believe in beyond the grinding horror of daily existence. We serve that purpose. We are the visible hand of the Emperor's will. We are proof that he still watches, still cares, still protects." He looks back at you, and there's something in his gaze that makes you shiver. But you have seen beneath the symbol. You have seen the truth that the helmet conceals. And now I will tell you exactly what that truth means, and why it will kill you. The water continues to run. The sound is almost peaceful, almost soothing, as if the universe itself doesn't care that your world is ending. "But first," he says, and his voice drops even lower, "you must understand what we are, what we were, and what was sacrificed to create us." He turns away from you, looking at his reflection in the still water of the basin. You can't see his face from this angle. Only the back of his head, the hair that's too perfect, too precisely placed, and the massive architecture of his shoulders and back, all that perfect muscle and bone encased in golden armor. "We begin," he says quietly, "with a child, always a child. Let me tell you about the golden myth, and why the truth beneath it must never be spoken." The custodian doesn't move from his position by the basin. He stands there, a statue rendered in flesh and oromite, and when he speaks again, his voice has taken on a different quality. It's distant, as if he's reciting something from memory, which you realize with a chill he probably is. A memory that's 10,000 years old, preserved with perfect clarity in a mind that never forgets. "There is a ceremony," he begins, "that takes place on Terra once every few generations. It is not public. Most of the Imperium has never heard of it. But in certain circles, the High Lords, the most senior members of the Adeptus Terra, the heads of ancient noble houses, it is known. It is called the selection." You want to ask what he means, but you don't dare interrupt. You have the sense that he's offering you something precious and terrible, and that any disruption might cause him to stop, to remember what comes after this conversation, to remember the protocols he mentioned. "Children are brought to the Imperial Palace," he continues. "Not many, perhaps a dozen per generation. They are selected through methods that would take hours to explain: genetic screening, astrological charting, psychic augury. But what matters is this: they are rare. 1 in several billion humans carries the genetic markers necessary for consideration. These children are humanity's potential perfection, concentrated into a handful of young souls." He lifts his hands from the basin. Water drips from his fingers, catching the light. You watch the droplets fall and can't help but notice that they seem to move in slow motion, as if even water doesn't quite obey normal physics around him. "They are brought before us," he says. "The existing custodians. We examine them, we speak with them. We try to determine which ones have not just the genetics, but the temperament, the will, the capacity to endure what comes next." His hands curl into fists. Water squeezes between his fingers. "They are children," he repeats, and this time there's something in his voice, something that might be anger or might be grief. Between 8 and 12 years old typically, old enough to speak, old enough to express preference. And we actually ask them, if they wish to become like us, if they wish to serve the Emperor forever. He turns to face you again. The light catches his features, and you see something in his expression that makes your chest tighten. It's not quite pain, not quite anything human, but it's something. "Can you imagine," he asks, "what a child understands of such an offer? Can you imagine what forever means to someone who has lived less than a decade? What serve means to a child who has never known true hardship?" You can't answer. Your throat is too tight. They say yes, he continues softly. They always say yes, because they are told they will become heroes, because they are told they will protect humanity. Because they are shown us, the custodian guard in all our golden glory, and they want to be like us. They want to be strong, to be special, to matter. He looks down at his hands, at the scars that crisscross them. They do not understand what they are agreeing to. How could they? How could anyone? The question hangs in the air, rhetorical, unanswerable. You've seen custodians before, he says, switching tracks abruptly. From a distance, during ceremonies. You nod, tell me what you saw. You swallow, try to think back. It's hard to focus, hard to remember anything before this moment, but you force yourself. You stood guard during the feast of the Emperor's Ascension. There were 10 of you, 20, standing at attention while the High Lord's process passed. You didn't move, not once. For hours. 6 hours and 43 minutes, he says. Without shifting, without blinking more than necessary for ocular health. Perfect discipline, perfect form. Tell me, what did you think when you saw that? I thought, you hesitate, it seems foolish now, childish. I thought it was impressive. I thought you must be incredibly dedicated, incredibly strong. You thought we were exemplary humans. Yes. We are not. The words are flat, final. He moves away from the basin, and you have to force yourself not to flinch as he approaches. He doesn't come too close, maintaining a careful distance, as if even now he's being courteous to your fear, but close enough that you have to tilt your head back to meet his eyes. Humans cannot stand perfectly still for nearly 7 hours, he says. The body rebels, muscles ache, joints stiffen, the mind wanders. No amount of training can overcome basic biology, but we are not bound by basic biology. We do not ache, we do not stiffen. Our minds do not wander because they have been shaped to perfect focus. He touches his chest, right over where his heart would be. We are manufactured, engineered. What you saw during that ceremony was not discipline, it was programming. The word chills you, programming, as if he's a servitor. As if there's no difference between him and the lobotomized cyborgs that shamble through the palace's lower levels, carrying out mindless tasks with dead eyes. But he's not a servitor. He's standing here speaking to you, expressing something that could almost be emotion, isn't he? You don't believe me, he observes. You look at me and see a person, someone who thinks, who feels, who chooses. Yes, you whisper. You are not wrong, he says. But you are not right either. I am complex. We all are. But that complexity exists within boundaries that were set when I was a child, when I was remade. He walks past you, moving to examine something on the far wall, an inscription you can't read from this angle. His movements are hypnotic, too smooth, too perfect. Like watching a vidrecording that's been enhanced, every motion flow optimized for efficiency and grace. Let me tell you what the public sees, he says, his back still to you. They see us during parades. We march through the great processional ways and the crowds line up to watch. We are golden giants moving in perfect synchronization. Our armor catches the light. We carry our guardian spears, weapons that are themselves works of art, worth more than most citizens will earn in 100 lifetimes. We are magnificent. He turns his head slightly, giving you his profile. Children point. They ask their parents if they can become custodians when they grow up. The parents smile and tell them no, it is not possible. The custodians are special, chosen by the emperor himself, but they should aspire to serve in whatever capacity the Imperium requires. They should try to be as dutiful, as loyal, as selfless as the Golden Guardians. His jaw tightens infinitesimally. They do not know what they are telling their children to aspire to. He turns back to face you fully. They see us during executions, when traitors or heretics must be put to death in view of the public. We serve as the Emperor's justice. A single stroke of a guardian spear and it is done. Quick, clean, efficient. The crowds watch and they see divine retribution. They see the Emperors will made manifest. He pauses. They do not see that we feel nothing when we kill, not satisfaction, not righteous anger, not even distaste. We simply execute the action. The same way you might stamp a form or file a document. It is function, purpose, nothing more. Your hands are shaking. You clasp them together in your lap, trying to still them. It doesn't work. You are beginning to understand, he says. It's not a question. You are beginning to see why the helmet matters, why the mystery matters. He gestures to his own face. When I am helmeted, you can project onto me whatever you need: nobility, valor, righteous fury, all the qualities that make for a compelling symbol. The helmet allows you to see a hero, but this face, he touches his cheek with one finger. This face tells a different story. What story? Your voice comes out hoarse. The story of cost, he says simply. The story of what was paid to create the symbol. The story that the Imperium cannot afford to have told. He returns to the bench across from you and sits. The movement is strange, too controlled, as if he's actively thinking about how to fold his body, rather than just doing it naturally. He rests his hands on his knees and regards you with those golden eyes. I will tell you what was done to me, he says. What was done to all of us, and then you will understand why your death is not cruelty but necessity. You want to look away. You want to close your eyes and cover your ears like a child hiding from thunder, but you can't. You're held by his gaze, by the terrible gravity of this moment. The process takes decades, he begins. It begins with the genetic material. The child who enters the palace is mapped at the molecular level. Every strand of DNA is examined, catalogued, judged. Then the adjustments begin. He holds up one hand, studying it as if it belongs to someone else. First, the bones, they are broken, carefully, precisely. Compound fractures at every major joint. The marrow is extracted and replaced with a gene-forged substitute that will produce denser, stronger blood cells. The bones are then reset and held in position while biological catalysts force them to heal in new configurations. Longer, thicker, stronger. The process takes months. The pain is significant. He says this last word with what might be understatement, might be dark humor. It's impossible to tell. The child is kept sedated during most of this. Conscious pain would drive them mad, but some pain is necessary. The brain must learn the new dimensions of the body, must begin to map the changed territory. Your stomach churns. You swallow bile. Then the muscles, he continues relentlessly. Gene-forged fiber is woven into existing tissue. The muscle mass increases by factors that would be fatal in an unmodified human. The heart couldn't support it, the skeleton couldn't bear the weight. But by this point, the heart has also been modified. Replaced, actually. A new organ grown in vats, genetically identical to the child's original but engineered for performance that surpasses any natural heart. 3 chambers instead of 2, capable of beating at 200 times per minute without strain. He taps his chest. I have not had a naturally occurring heartbeat in 10,000 years. This organ will outlive the heat death of stars. It will never falter, never weaken, never know exhaustion. The way he says this, there's something in his tone, not quite longing, but something adjacent to it, as if the idea of a heart that could tire, that could fail, holds some appeal. The lungs are modified, he continues. Ribosomes are introduced that allow for more efficient oxygen processing. We can breathe in environments that would kill unmodified humans. We can hold our breath for up to an hour without discomfort. He touches his face, tracing the line of his jaw. The skull is the most delicate work. It must be expanded to accommodate enhanced brain tissue, but the expansion must be perfect. Too much and the proportion becomes monstrous. Too little and the new neural matter has no room to grow. The face is disassembled, piece by piece. Bone is shaved away here, built up there. The eye sockets are enlarged and deepened. The jaw is restructured. When it is reassembled, it will be according to a template of mathematical perfection. Your vision is starting to swim. You feel lightheaded. And then comes the worst part, he says softly, the mind. He leans forward slightly and you can smell him now, that strange antiseptic scent like ozone and sacred oils and something organic you can't identify. Memory is malleable, he says, especially in children whose brains are being physically restructured. Certain neural pathways are encouraged, others are discouraged. Emotions that serve no purpose in a guardian are dampened. Fear, desire, ambition for personal gain. These things are not erased. That would create a servitor, and we are not servitors, but they are buried, sublimated, redirected into acceptable channels. His eyes don't blink. You realize you haven't seen him blink in minutes. New conditioning is layered in. Loyalty to the emperor that transcends rational thought. Devotion to duty that overrides self-preservation. The capacity for perfect patience. We can wait for centuries if necessary, without complaint or deterioration of focus. The ability to make tactical decisions in nanoseconds, processing information faster than any unmodified human could perceive it. He sits back. The child who entered the palace ceases to exist somewhere during this process. There is no single moment of death. No clear line where the boy ends and the custodian begins. It is gradual, erosive, like a statue emerging from stone, except the statue is all that remains. The stone is carved away until nothing of the original material is visible. The silence that follows is crushing. You can't speak, can barely breathe. All you can do is stare at this perfect, terrible being and try to comprehend the horror of what he's describing. This is what lies beneath the helmet, he says finally. This is what you saw when you looked at my face. Not a person, not anymore. A tool, a weapon, a work of art created through the systematic destruction of a child's humanity. He stands abruptly, moving back to the basin. He places both hands on the edge and leans forward, staring into the water. The Imperium needs us, he says, his voice echoing slightly in the small chamber. Humanity needs symbols of perfection, incorruptible guardians who will never fail, never falter, never question. We are the bulwark against the dark. We are the proof that humanity can achieve the divine. He lifts his head, meeting your eyes in the reflection on the water's surface. But if they knew the cost, if they truly understood what was sacrificed to create us, they would hesitate. They would question. And in the grim darkness of the far future, hesitation is death. Questions are poison. Faith must be absolute. He turns to face you once more. That is why you cannot leave this chamber. That is why others before you have not left. Because the truth is corrosive. Because doubt spreads like disease. Because the Imperium is built on necessary lies, and you have seen through one of the most fundamental. Your mouth is dry. When you finally manage to speak, your voice doesn't sound like your own. How many, you ask, how many others have seen? Something flickers in his expression. He's quiet for a long moment, and you have the sense that he's sorting through memories, thousands of them, tens of thousands, all perfectly preserved in that engineered mind. More than there should have been, he finally says. Fewer than you might think. He walks toward you again, but this time he doesn't stop at a careful distance. He comes close, close enough that you have to crane your neck back to look at him, close enough that you can see every impossible detail of his face. The too perfect symmetry, the way the skin seems to have no visible pores, the subtle geometric precision of every feature. Look at me, he commands, and there's something in his voice that makes it impossible to disobey. Look at what you have seen, understand it, because I am going to tell you something now, something that very few have ever heard. You force yourself to maintain eye contact, though every instinct screams at you to look away. This face, he says, gesturing to himself, is a masterpiece. It took decades to create. It will last for millennia without degradation. It is objectively beautiful according to every mathematical measure humanity has ever devised. He leans down, bringing his face level with yours. You can see yourself reflected in those golden eyes, small, fragile, terrified. And it is the face of a tragedy that must never be acknowledged. He straightens up, moving away again. The relief you feel at the distance is almost physical. "You asked how many have seen," he says. "Let me tell you about some of them. Let me tell you their stories. Perhaps then you will understand not just why you must die, but why that death is mercy." He walks to the chamber's entrance, that door you pushed open in what feels like another lifetime, and places his hand against the frame. The door swings shut with a soft, final sound. The golden light in the chamber seems to intensify, as if you're now sealed in a bubble outside of normal space and time. "We have time," he says, turning back to you. "Time for me to share what I have carried for 10,000 years. The faces, the stories, the witnesses who saw what you have seen and paid the same price you will pay." He returns to the bench across from you and settles into position, that too-controlled movement again, as if sitting is something he's learned rather than something that comes naturally. "I will tell you about the remembrancer," he begins, "and the chirurgeon, and the brother. I will tell you about every soul whose death I carry in my perfect, unfailing memory." His eyes meet yours, and in them you see something that might be the closest thing to human emotion this being can still manage. "And then," he says softly, "I will tell you about your choices, the few that remain to you, the ways this can end." The water continues to run in the basin behind him. The sound is starting to drive you mad, that constant, peaceful trickling so at odds with the nightmare you've stumbled into. "But first," he says, "you must understand. You must see the pattern. You must know that you are not alone in this. That others have stood where you stand, have felt what you feel, and have faced what you will face." He spreads his hands in a gesture that might be meant to be comforting but somehow isn't. "Let me tell you," he says, "about the others who saw." The custodian falls silent. The quiet stretches between you like a physical thing, heavy and suffocating. You realize he's waiting, not for you to speak, but for you to truly see. To process what your eyes took in during those first, fragmentary moments when you stumbled through the doorway and witnessed the forbidden. Your gaze drifts back to his face. You can't help it. It's like trying not to look at a wound, at something fundamentally wrong that demands acknowledgement. But this time, instead of the overwhelming shock that scattered your thoughts like leaves in a storm, you can examine the details, the specifics, the terrible artistry of what was done to create this being. "You're staring," he observes. There's no judgment in his voice, no discomfort. That's appropriate. Most who see cannot look away. The human brain is drawn to faces. It's one of the first things an infant learns to recognize, but your brain doesn't know what to do with this face. It registers as human enough to demand recognition, but wrong enough to trigger instinct alarms. He's right. You can feel it, the cognitive dissonance creating a low-level nausea in your gut. Your mind keeps trying to process what you're seeing as person and keeps failing, falling back into the uncanny valley where almost human things dwell. "Tell me what you see," he says. "Describe it. Put words to what your instincts are screaming." You swallow hard. Your mouth is dry, your tongue thick, but you force yourself to speak. If this is to be your last conversation, and you know it will be, then perhaps there's strange mercy in naming the horror. "Your eyes," you begin hesitantly. "They're too large, not grotesquely, it's subtle. But once I notice it, I can't unsee it. And they're too bright. That gold color, it's not natural. When you move your head, they catch the light like metal, like actual metal." "The eyes were among the most complex modifications," he says. "They can perceive across a broader spectrum than human vision. I can see into the ultraviolet range, detect heat signatures in the infrared. I can focus on a single dust mote at 50 meters or adjust to take in an entire battlefield at once." The pupils, he pauses, and you watch as his pupils dilate and contract in rapid succession, independent of the ambient light, respond not just to illumination but to dozens of other stimuli. Threat assessment, distance calculation, targeting acquisition. You watch those golden eyes shift and change and your stomach lurches. It's too mechanical, too precise. "The color was not chosen for aesthetics," he continues, "though it serves that purpose. The gold is a side effect of the genetic modifications, specifically the alteration to the retinal cells. They required a new structure of crystalline proteins to function across the enhanced spectrum. The molecular arrangement reflects light differently than natural human eyes. He tilts his head slightly and you notice something else, something you missed before. You're not blinking, you whisper. I do blink, he corrects gently, but far less frequently than you. Every 47 seconds on average, precisely enough to maintain ocular moisture without disrupting focus. Human beings blink every 2 to 10 seconds and most of those blinks are unconscious, involuntary. Mine are controlled. Optimized. Word optimized hits you like a physical blow. He speaks of his own body the way a tech priest might speak of a machine, with clinical detachment, with focus on function and efficiency. What else? He prompts. You force yourself to continue scanning his features. The bone structure draws your attention next, that impossible symmetry you noticed before. Your face is too perfect, you say. It's exactly the same on both sides. Humans aren't like that. Even the most beautiful people have asymmetries. One eye slightly higher than the other. One side of the smile that lifts more. But you're mirrored, like someone drew a line down the center and reflected one half perfectly onto the other. Bilateral symmetry was enforced during the reconstruction, he confirms. The original bone structure, the child structure, had normal human variations. Those were corrected. Every facial bone was broken, measured, and reset according to mathematical models derived from the emperor's own work. The result is what you see. He touches his cheekbone with one long finger, tracing the perfect line of it. In nature, perfect symmetry is rare. It usually indicates genetic health, freedom from developmental stresses and parasites. Humans are subconsciously attracted to symmetrical faces because they signal fitness for survival and reproduction. But there is a threshold. Beyond a certain point, perfection becomes disturbing. Your brain recognizes it as artificial, impossible, and therefore threatening. You're nodding before you realize it. Yes. That's exactly what you feel, threatened. Not because he's moved to hurt you, he's been nothing but courteous in his terrible way, but because every aspect of him broadcasts wrongness, predatory perfection. The skin, you continue, your voice gaining a steadier rhythm as you fall into the cataloging, as if by naming each horror you can make it manageable. It doesn't look real, it's too smooth, too even. There are no pores, no blemishes, no variation in tone or texture. The dermal layers were completely replaced during the transformation, he explains. The new skin is a bioengineered material, still organic, still capable of sensation but designed for durability and function. It's resistant to chemical burns, extreme temperatures, radiation. It doesn't age. It doesn't scar except under the most extreme damage, and even then the scars are neater than human scars, more orderly. He holds out his arm, pushing back the sleeve of his armor underlay to reveal more of that perfect porcelain flesh. Look closely, he says. You lean forward and in the golden light you can see what you missed before. There are marks, hundreds, thousands of tiny white lines crisscrossing the skin in delicate patterns. They're barely visible, each one hair thin, but together they create a subtle web across the entire surface. 10,000 years of combat, he says quietly. Even this skin can be damaged. These are the marks of blades, claws, bullets, shrapnel, energy weapons. Each one healed almost perfectly, but not quite. The imperfection is microscopic, but it accumulates. You realize what you're looking at, a map, a topographical survey of violence spanning millennia. Every line represents a moment where something tried to kill him and failed. Every mark is a testament to battles you cannot imagine, enemies you would have no context for. How many times have you died? The question escapes before you can stop it. His expression shifts, subtle, barely perceptible, but there, something that might be dark amusement. I have never died, he says. That is the point. But I have been wounded in ways that would kill any unmodified human dozens of times over. My hearts, yes, plural, I have 3 now, have been pierced. My lungs have been collapsed. I have fought with bones shattered and organs ruptured. The body continues. It is designed to continue. 3 hearts, of course. You should have expected that after everything else, but somehow the casual way he mentions it makes you feel faint. You're pale, you observe, desperate to move the conversation away from that revelation. Not just light-skinned, pale like stone, like something that's never seen the sun. I have seen the sun, he says. I stood at the Emperor's side when we united Terra under the blazing heat of the African wastelands. I have fought on worlds where twin stars scorched the earth. But you are correct. The skin no longer produces melanin in response to ultraviolet exposure. It cannot tan, cannot burn. The pigmentation you see now is fixed. It was lighter to begin with, the child's skin, but the engineering process bleached out what remained. He looks down at his own hands, turning them over as if seeing them for the first time. Sometimes I try to remember what they looked like before, he says softly. The child's hands, were they this pale? Or is that a false memory, my mind backfilling lost data with present observations? The question seems rhetorical, but there's something in his voice, a crack in the perfect facade, a moment of genuine uncertainty that somehow makes everything worse. Because if even he doesn't remember what he was, then what hope is there of understanding what he's become? The hair, you continue, pulling your focus back. You need to keep cataloging, need to keep naming. It's the only thing keeping you from complete breakdown. It's wrong too, it's too perfect, too arranged. Each strand of his hair is exactly the right length, the right thickness. They lie in perfect alignment, neither messy nor artificially stiff. It's hair, unmistakably, but hair that has been engineered to some ideal specification. The hair follicles were gene-modded for consistency, he says. Each strand grows at the same rate to the same thickness. It doesn't thin with age because I don't age. It doesn't gray because the melanocytes don't degrade. I could pull out a handful and it would regrow within a week, exactly as it was before. He runs a hand through his hair, a curiously human gesture, and you watch the strands fall back into perfect position as if they know exactly where they're meant to be. Everything about me is controlled, he continues. Everything is purposeful. There is no chaos, no randomness, no entropy. I am a closed system, carefully maintained, endlessly perpetuated. The way he says this, it should sound triumphant. The defeat of entropy, the achievement of effective immortality. But instead it sounds like a lament, like a description of a prison. You're crying. You don't know when you started, but tears are running down your face, hot and salt-sharp. You taste them at the corners of your mouth. Your vision blurs and you have to blink several times to clear it. Why are you crying? He asks. Not unkindly, with what seems like genuine curiosity. Because it's horrible, you whisper. What was done to you, it's horrible. He's silent for a long moment. When he speaks again, his voice is very quiet. Is it? By every objective measure, I am superior to unmodified humans. I am stronger, faster, more durable, more intelligent. I will never know sickness, never know infirmity, never know the degradation of age. I have lived for 10,000 years and will live for 10,000 more. I have stood in the presence of the Emperor himself. I have fought demons and lived. I have seen wonders and horrors beyond your comprehension. How is that horrible? You meet his eyes, those terrible golden eyes, and you see that he genuinely wants an answer. That he's asking not to be cruel, but because he truly cannot understand your perspective. Because you were a child, you say, and you didn't know what you were agreeing to. Nobody could. Nobody could understand the price until it had already been paid. Something happens to his face. It's minute, a tightening around the eyes, a subtle shift in the set of his mouth. But for the first time since this nightmare began, you see something like pain cross those perfect features. No, he agrees quietly. Nobody could. The silence that follows is different than the ones before. This silence aches. It's full of all the things that cannot be said, cannot be articulated, because the capacity to feel them fully was burned away millennia ago. You force yourself to look at him again. Really look. To see past the horror of the wrongness and try to find what's underneath. The remnant, the ghost of the boy who stood in this palace, or one like it, and said yes to monsters who asked if he wanted to become like them. How old were you? You ask. When you were selected. 9, he says. Standard Terran years, young enough for the bone structure to be malleable, old enough to survive the initial procedures. 9, you close your eyes trying to imagine it. A 9-year-old child, still believing in heroes, still capable of wonder and trust and all the things that get slowly crushed out of humans as they age. That child looked at the custodians, beings like the one before you now, and saw not horror but aspiration. What was your name? The question comes out before you can consider whether it's wise to ask. His head tilts slightly. I am called Valdor of the... No, you interrupt, and you can't believe your own audacity. Not your title, your name, the child's name before. The silence that falls is absolute. You've crossed some line, asked something you shouldn't have. You brace yourself for anger, for punishment, for the swift end to this terrible conversation. But it doesn't come. Instead, the custodian, this being who has told you about genetic modification and biological engineering with perfect clinical detachment, goes very, very still. The kind of stillness that only something not quite alive can achieve. He doesn't breathe, doesn't blink. For a moment, you wonder if you've somehow broken him, if asking him to remember something so fundamental has caused some kind of system failure. Then he speaks, and his voice is different, softer, younger, as if by reaching back across 10 millennia he's touched something that was buried so deep he'd forgotten it existed. Aaron, he whispers. My mother called me Aaron. The name hangs in the air between you. 5 letters, 2 syllables. The last remaining piece of a child who stopped existing before the Imperium even had that name. Do you remember her? You ask. Your mother. His eyes close. You watch the muscles in his face. Those too perfect, too precise muscles work as if struggling against some internal conflict. I remember remembering, he says slowly. I remember that I once knew what she looked like. I remember that her voice made me feel safe, but I cannot recall the specifics. Her face is gone. Her voice is gone. What remains is the memory of absence, the knowledge that something was there and is no more. He opens his eyes, and for a moment, just a moment, you see something in them that transcends the golden artificiality. You see loss, pure, aching, 10,000-year-old loss. They tell us, he continues, voice still soft, that the memory modification is merciful, that it would be cruel to leave us with full recollection of what we were, who we loved, what we sacrificed, that the weight of that grief would be unbearable across millennia. Perhaps they are right. Perhaps I should be grateful that Aaron's mother is just a ghost of a ghost, rather than a sharp and present pain. He looks directly at you. But sometimes, very rarely, in moments like this, I wonder if the loss of grief is not a greater cruelty than grief itself. If in taking away my capacity to mourn what was done to me, they took away the last thing that made me human. You cannot speak. Your throat is closed with tears you're not even trying to hold back anymore. This perfect, terrifying, inhuman being has just articulated something so profoundly sad that it feels like your heart is breaking inside your chest. You're still crying, he observes. Your lacrimal response is quite pronounced. Does my story cause you such distress? Yes, you manage to choke out, because you can't cry. Because they took that from you too. He blinks slowly, once, twice. Then he does something unexpected. He reaches up and touches the corner of his own eye with one long finger. When he pulls it away, there's moisture there. A single, perfect tear catching the golden light. I can cry, he says, looking at the drop of liquid on his fingertip with something like wonder. The biological mechanism was retained for ocular health, but you're right. I cannot cry because I'm sad. I cannot cry because I'm in pain. The emotions that trigger human tears were dampened, redirected. He looks at that single tear for a long moment, and you see his face do something strange. The expression shifts, trying to arrange itself into something, trying to feel something. The effort is visible, the two perfect muscles moving in ways they weren't designed to, searching for a configuration that might express grief or loss or regret. But the expression never fully forms. It flickers and dies, and his face returns to that neutral, terrible perfection. I remember that I could once, he says quietly. Aaron could cry. He cried when he fell and scraped his knee. He cried when his mother sang sad songs. He cried the day he left home to come to the palace, even though he was trying to be brave. He wipes the tear on his armor, and it leaves a tiny streak of moisture that evaporates almost immediately. But that child is dead, he continues, voice returning to its normal measured tone. And I am what was built from his remains. A better question is not whether I can mourn him, but whether I should. Whether mourning has any purpose beyond the indulgence of sentiment. Of course it has purpose, you say, and you're surprised by the vehemence in your own voice. Mourning is how we honor what was lost, how we acknowledge that something mattered. If you can't mourn him, if nobody can mourn him, then it's like he never existed at all. The custodian regards you for a long moment. Something shifts in his expression, not emotion exactly, but recognition, acknowledgement. Perhaps that is why you must die, he says softly. You have seen my face, and in seeing it you have seen Aaron. You have mourned him. And that mourning, that recognition of the tragedy, is precisely what the Imperium cannot permit. The words should terrify you. They're a confirmation of your death sentence delivered with calm finality. But instead they make you angry. The anger rises up from somewhere deep, cutting through the fear and horror and overwhelming sadness. The Imperium is wrong, you say. Your voice shakes, but you push forward. If it requires children to be destroyed to create its defenders, if it requires that destruction to be hidden and forgotten and never mourned, then the Imperium is wrong. You expect retaliation, immediate and violent. You've just committed heresy of the highest order, blasphemed against the very foundations of imperial authority in the presence of one of its ultimate enforcers. But the custodian doesn't move, doesn't reach for a weapon, doesn't do anything except look at you with those ancient golden eyes. Yes, he says simply. The word hits you like a physical blow. You stare at him, unable to process what you just heard. Yes, he repeats. The Imperium is wrong. It has been wrong since its inception. It is built on horrors piled atop horrors, necessary evils that have long since ceased to be necessary but continue because the machinery is too vast to stop. It grinds human souls into paste and calls the result progress. It demands infinite sacrifice and offers only the promise of slightly delayed extinction. He leans forward, and there's something in his posture now, an intensity that makes the air feel heavy. But it is also all that stands between humanity and annihilation, he continues. In a galaxy that wants nothing more than to devour us, to corrupt us, to erase us from existence, the Imperium's wrongness is the only thing that has kept our species alive for 10,000 years. So we, I and my brothers, perpetuate the lies. We maintain the symbols. We become the masks we wear because the alternative is the death of everything. He sits back again, and the intensity fades, replaced by that familiar weariness. You are right to be angry, he says. You are right to mourn. You are right to recognize the tragedy. And that is precisely why you cannot leave this chamber. Because your rightness, multiplied across billions of souls, would lead to questions. Questions would lead to doubt. Doubt would lead to the unraveling of faith. And without faith, without the carefully maintained lies that keep the machine turning, the Imperium would collapse. You want to argue, want to scream that there must be another way, that humanity shouldn't have to choose between horror and extinction, but you can't. Because looking at this being, this perfect, broken, 10,000-year-old weapon forged from a child's stolen future, you know he's right. In the grim darkness of the far future, there are no good choices, only survival and extinction, and survival has a price. You understand now, he says. It's not a question. You see what you saw. You understand what it means. You know why the helmet matters. You nod slowly. You do understand, not just intellectually, but in your bones, in your soul. You looked upon the face of humanity's defender and saw the cost written in perfect, terrible detail. You saw the child sacrificed on the altar of necessity. You saw the grief that cannot be mourned and the tragedy that cannot be acknowledged. And that knowledge, that truth, is poison. It's a crack in the carefully constructed mythology that keeps the Imperium functional. It's a question mark where there must be only certainty. "I'm sorry," the custodian says, and for the first time you believe he means it. "I am sorry that you took a wrong turn, sorry that you saw, sorry for what must come next." He stands, moving with that too perfect grace. He picks up his helmet from where it rests beside the basin and holds it in both hands, looking at it as if seeing it for the first time. "But before we discuss what comes next," he says, "before we speak of endings and choices and the very few options that remain to you, I want you to understand something else. You need to know that you are not alone, that others have stood where you stand, that this has happened before and will happen again." He turns the helmet in his hands. The golden surface reflects distorted images, his face, your face, the chamber around you, all twisted and strange. "Let me tell you," he says quietly, "about the others who saw, about the remembrancer and the chirurgeon and the brother. Let me tell you how each of them faced this moment and what it meant." He sets the helmet down again carefully, reverently, as if it's not just armor but a sacred object, which you realize it is. It's the mask that makes the lie possible, the barrier between human and inhuman, the tool that allows the tragedy to remain hidden. "Their stories will not comfort you," he continues, "but perhaps they will help you understand that your death is not meaningless, that you will be remembered even if only by me, that in my perfect, eternal memory you will live on, just as Aaron lives on in the ghost of a ghost." He returns to the bench and sits, settling into that carefully controlled posture. "Listen," he says, "and remember, because soon you will join them in the catalog of witnesses. Soon your story will be added to the ones I carry. But for now, while you still breathe, while you still think and feel and fear, listen." The water continues to run, that constant, maddening trickle. The sound of time passing, the sound of moments slipping away. And as the custodian begins to speak, his voice low and measured and heavy with the weight of centuries, you realize that you're about to hear ghost stories, tales of the dead, told by something that's neither living nor dead, but something in between. Stories of those who saw the face beneath the gold and paid the price for that vision. "Her name was Veritasia Kine," the custodian begins, and his voice takes on a quality you haven't heard before, something almost like storytelling, though stripped of warmth. "A remembrancer during the Great Crusade. Do you know what that means?" You shake your head. "The remembrancers were artists," he explains. "Poets, painters, sculptors, historians. They were given the task of documenting the crusade, of creating a grand record of humanity's expansion across the stars. It was believed," and here something like irony creeps into his tone, "that the glory of the Imperium should be preserved for future generations. That art and beauty had a place even in conquest." He falls silent for a moment, and you get the sense that he's sifting through memories, selecting the right details from an ocean of perfectly preserved moments. "Veritasia was assigned to document the custodian guard," he continues. "Specifically, she was to create a series of portraits, propaganda pieces essentially, though they were never called that. She was given unprecedented access, allowed into the training halls, the armories, even the outer chambers of the palace. She sketched us in combat at rest during ceremonies. She was talented, very talented." He looks down at his hands. "I was selected to sit for a formal portrait, a full-scale work to be displayed in the newly conquered territories as a symbol of the emperor's authority. She was told I would pose in full armor, helmeted with my guardian spear, a standard heroic composition." You can hear where this is going. Your stomach tightens. "The sitting took place over several days," he continues. "She worked in silence mostly, with the kind of intense focus that reminded me of how we approach combat, total immersion in the task. But on the third day, she asked me a question." He pauses, and when he speaks again, his voice is softer, as if he's quoting exact words from a conversation 10,000 years past. She said, "Do you ever wonder what you look like? Beneath the helmet, I mean. Do you remember your own face?" The question hangs in the air. You can imagine it, the artist's curiosity, the human need to see, to understand, to capture truth rather than symbol. I told her that my face was irrelevant, he says, that the custodian guard did not require individual features, that we were meant to be interchangeable, perfect, and identical in our service. But she persisted. She said that every face tells a story. That to truly capture the essence of the custodian guard, she needed to understand what lay beneath the mask. His fingers drum once against his knee, a gesture that seems unconscious, almost human, and therefore jarring. I should have refused, should have reported her curiosity to my superiors and had her reassigned, but there was something about the way she asked, something about her conviction that truth mattered more than propaganda. It reminded me of. He trails off, then starts again. It reminded me of something, I don't know what, a ghost of a memory perhaps, but I granted her request. You find yourself leaning forward, caught in the narrative despite its inevitable tragedy. I removed my helmet, he says, and I watched her face as she saw mine. He's quiet for a long moment, and you realize he's reliving the memory with perfect clarity. Seeing it again through those golden eyes that forget nothing. She didn't scream, he finally continues. Didn't recoil, she just stared. For minutes she stood there, brush in hand, paint dripping onto the floor, and stared. And then, his voice drops even lower, she began to cry. The image forms in your mind, an artist confronted with a beauty that's also horror, with perfection that reveals tragedy, unable to reconcile what she's seeing with what she'd expected. I asked her why she wept, he says. She told me, because you're beautiful and you're terrible and I can see what was done to make you this way. Then she said something else. She said, this is what I need to paint. This is the truth. You can hear the doom in those words, the naive belief that truth matters. That art should be honest. That beauty without context is a lie. She painted me, he continues, exactly as I was, helmetless, every detail captured with brutal honesty, the too perfect proportions, the golden eyes, the absence of natural asymmetry. And she painted something else, something I hadn't even realized was visible. She painted the sorrow. Sorrow, you echo. In my expression, he clarifies. I had thought my face was neutral, blank, but she saw something there, some residue of what had been taken, perhaps. Some ghost of Aaron looking out through eyes that no longer knew how to weep. She captured it, made it visible, made it undeniable. His jaw tightens infinitesimally. The painting was magnificent, he says, a masterwork. When it was completed, she stepped back and looked at it for a long time. Then she looked at me and said, they're going to kill me for this, aren't they? I told her yes. She nodded, said, it was worth it, to capture the truth, to make one honest thing in a galaxy of lies. The silence that follows is heavy with implication. She was executed 3 days later, he says flatly, after the painting was destroyed. Her studio was burned. Her other works were examined for signs of similar distortions of imperial truth, and many were purged. Her name was struck from the official records of remembrancers. She was erased as thoroughly as if she had never existed. He looks up at you, and there's something in his expression that might be the closest thing to guilt his modified mind can produce. But I remember, he says. I remember every brushstroke of that painting. I remember the exact shade of oil she used. I remember the way the light fell across the canvas. I remember her hands shaking as she worked, knowing what it would cost her. And I remember her face when they came for her, calm, resolved, unrepentant. Why are you telling me this? You ask, your voice comes out hoarse. Because I want you to understand something, he says. Veritasia Kind died. Her art was destroyed. But the truth she captured, the honesty of that portrait, lives on in my memory with perfect clarity. Her death did not erase what she saw. It simply ensured that no one else would see it. The truth was contained, not eliminated. He leans forward slightly. You asked earlier if I mourned, he says. I told you I cannot, but I remember. And perhaps remembrance for a being like me is what mourning is for humans. Perhaps my perfect recollection of Veritasia Kind and her doomed painting is the only memorial she will ever have. The thought is both beautiful and heartbreaking. This 10,000-year-old weapon, carrying the ghost of an artist's final work in his mind, unable to feel grief but also unable to forget. "There are others," he says. "So many others. Let me tell you about Magos biologis Hester Crone." He shifts slightly, and you realize he's settling in for a longer telling. As if by speaking these stories, he's performing some kind of ritual, some acknowledgement of the dead that his modified mind can manage. Hester Crone was one of the most brilliant biological scientists in the Imperium, he begins. A master of genetics, cybernetics, and the intersection between them. She had worked on the creation protocols for several chapters of the Adeptus Custodes. She understood transhuman enhancement better than almost anyone alive. You can sense where this is going, but you let him tell it. This is important to him somehow. These stories are a burden he carries, and by sharing them, perhaps he's distributing that weight, however briefly. "There was a demonic incursion," he continues, "deep in the palace in sections that should have been inaccessible. We responded, the custodian guard, and we put down the threat. But one of my brothers was gravely wounded. The demon's blade had been coated in something that prevented normal healing. The wounds festered, spreading corruption through even his enhanced biology." His hand moves unconsciously to his side, as if remembering similar pain. "Hester Crone was summoned," he says. "She was the only one with both the clearance and the skill to attempt treatment. When she arrived, my brother was barely conscious. His armor had to be removed, including the helmet. You close your eyes imagining the scene, the wounded custodian, the master biologist, the moment when medical necessity overrode security protocol. The helmet had been damaged," he continues, "the seal broken. It had to be removed to access the head wounds. And Hester Crone, focused on her task, worked for 6 hours to save my brother's life. She saw his face, studied it in minute detail as she repaired the damage, understood with her brilliant scientific mind exactly what had been done to create him." His voice drops. "She said nothing during the procedure, maintained perfect professional composure, worked with the precision and skill that had made her famous. She saved his life. When she was finished, she cleaned her instruments, made her notes, and prepared to leave." "But she knew," you say. "She knew," he confirms. "How could she not? She had seen the modifications at a level of detail that made their purpose impossible to ignore. She had touched the bioengineered skin, felt the way the bone structure had been mathematically perfected, seen the neural implants that controlled emotion and enhanced cognition. She understood the price in ways that even Veritasia kind could not." He stands and walks back to the basin, watching the water flow over his hands. "We monitored her," he says, "for 3 days, watched to see if she would tell anyone, if she would record what she had seen, if the knowledge would leak." "Did she?" you ask, though you already know the answer. "No," he says. "She told no one, recorded nothing beyond standard medical notes that carefully omitted any mention of facial features or specific modifications. She went about her duties, attended her laboratories, presented her research to the Mechanicus councils. She was the picture of discretion." He turns to face you. "But her hands shook," he says. "When she thought no one was watching, when she was alone in her laboratory, her hands shook. She would stop in the middle of experiments and stare at her own hands as if she no longer recognized them, as if by touching what we had become, she had contaminated herself with the knowledge of what humanity could be twisted into." The image is visceral, a brilliant mind breaking under the weight of understanding. "On the 3rd night," he continues, "I came to her. She was not surprised to see me. She had been expecting it, I think. She asked me to make it quick, to not use memory wipes or servitor conversion. She said she would rather die with her mind intact than live as a hollowed-out shell." His expression is unreadable. "I asked her why she hadn't told anyone," he says. "Why she had kept the secret even though she knew it would make no difference to her fate. She laughed, a bitter, broken sound. She said, 'Because you were right to do it. That's the worst part. Understanding the necessity doesn't make it less horrifying, but it makes it undeniable. You are what humanity needs to survive. And that need is the most damning indictment of our species I can imagine. The words hit like hammer blows, because they contain the same terrible logic you've been wrestling with since this nightmare began. Did you grant her request? You ask quietly, quick death. I did, he says. It was the only mercy I could offer. She died quickly, painlessly, and with her brilliant mind intact. I have carried her final words for 8,000 years. He moves away from the basin, pacing now, another gesture that seems almost human, as if the act of remembering is agitating something deep within his engineered calm. But the worst one, he says, and his voice changes, becomes softer, more hesitant. The worst one was my brother. You blink, confused. Your brother, another custodian. No, he says, my brother, Aaron's brother from before. The words steal the breath from your lungs. You hadn't considered this. Hadn't imagined that the threads of the child's life might still exist somewhere, that pieces of Aaron might still be walking around in the world, unaware that he's been transformed into something inhuman. His name was Darian, the custodian says, and there's something in his voice now, something raw. He was 12 when I was taken, Aaron's older brother. He tried to stop them from taking me, tried to argue with the officials, tried to fight, even though he was just a child facing the full power of the Imperium. He stops pacing and stands very still, staring at nothing. I don't remember him, he says. I don't remember what he looked like or the sound of his voice. I don't remember if we were close, if we fought, if we loved each other the way brothers do. All of that was taken from me during the transformation, but I know he existed. The records confirm it. What happened? You ask, though part of you doesn't want to know. He looked for me, the custodian says. For 70 years he looked for me. He became wealthy, started a trading consortium, built it into something significant. He cultivated relationships with noble houses, bribed officials, collected favors. All of it focused on one goal, to find his brother, to know what had happened to the child who had been taken from their family. The obsession paints itself in your mind, a lifetime dedicated to a single purpose, 70 years of searching. He finally succeeded, the custodian continues. Through means that cost him nearly everything he had built, he secured an audience. A private meeting with one of the custodian guard. He didn't know it was me. How could he? But the officials who arranged the meeting knew. Perhaps they thought it would be poetic. Perhaps they simply didn't care. He turns to look at you, and his eyes are haunted in ways that transcend their golden artificiality. I was standing there when he entered, he says. An old man, 87 years old, bent and weathered but still sharp, still focused. He looked at me, and I watched his face as he tried to find something familiar, some hint of the 9-year-old boy he had lost. The pause stretches. He asked me to remove my helmet, the custodian says, begged me, said he'd spent his whole life looking for his brother, that he just needed to know. Needed to see if it was really Aaron beneath the gold. Your hands are clenched so tight that your fingernails are cutting into your palms. I almost refused, he continues. Should have refused, but something, some ghost of recognition, some fragment of deleted data surfacing in my consciousness, made me comply. I removed my helmet, and I watched Darian's face as he looked at mine. What did he see? You whisper. He saw what you saw, the custodian says, perfect in human beauty, a face that bore no resemblance to the child he remembered, a stranger wearing flesh that had once been his brother. He stared for a long time, and then he started to laugh. Not joy, not humor. The laugh of someone whose mind is breaking under the weight of understanding. The custodian's voice drops to barely above a whisper. He said, "You're not Aaron. Aaron is dead, isn't he? He died the day they took him, and they built this from what remained." I told him yes, that was accurate, that the child he remembered no longer existed in any meaningful way, that I had no memory of him, no memory of our mother, no memory of anything that came before the transformation. You can see tears forming in your eyes again, blurring your vision. He asked me questions, the custodian continues, about our childhood, about things we did together. I could answer none of them, could offer nothing. And with each failed recognition, each absent memory, I watched something die in his eyes. He had spent 70 years searching, and he had found only proof that his brother was gone. The custodian's hands clench into fists. He asked me one more thing, he says. He asked, if I could give you back those memories, if I could tell you stories of who Aaron was, what he loved, what he feared, would you want them? And I had to tell him no, that I couldn't want them, that the capacity to want such things had been removed, that I was function without desire, purpose without personality. What did he do? You ask, though you're not sure you can bear to hear the answer. He wept, the custodian says simply, stood before me and wept the way only someone who has lost everything can weep. Then he said, then Aaron really is dead, and I've wasted my life mourning a ghost. I told him that was not true, that his search had honored Aaron's memory, that the love that drove him for 70 years meant something, even if I could no longer understand what. The custodian looks down at his hands. He looked at me one more time, he says, and he said, the boy you became would have wept to see what he's become. I'm glad he can't. At least he was spared that. Then he turned to leave. You killed him, you say, not an accusation, just recognition of inevitability. Not immediately, the custodian says. I let him reach the outer courtyard, let him see the sky one more time then. He makes a gesture swift, final. It was quick. He felt nothing. And I filed my report, unauthorized access to sensitive information. Security breach contained. Threat eliminated. The clinical language is almost worse than the death itself. But I remember, the custodian says, and there's something in his voice that might be the closest thing to agony his modified mind can produce. I remember his face. I remember the exact quality of his grief. I remember that he spent 70 years loving someone who no longer existed. And I remember that somewhere in the deleted sectors of my memory, there was once a boy who loved him back. He returns to the bench and sits heavily, as if the weight of these stories has finally exceeded even his enhanced capacity to bear. Do you understand now? He asks. These are the others who saw, the artist who captured truth and was erased for it, the scientist who understood the necessity and was killed despite her silence, the brother who searched for 70 years and found only loss, each one a tragedy, each one necessary, each one carried forward in my perfect, eternal memory. He looks at you with those ancient eyes. And now you, he says, you will join them. Your story will be added to the collection. And 10,000 years from now, if I still exist, I will remember every detail of this conversation. I will remember your face, your name, the way you cried when you understood what I am. I will carry you forward just as I carry them. The thought should be comforting, should offer some meaning to your impending death, but instead it's just sad. To be remembered by something that cannot mourn, to live on in a mind that cannot grieve. Why do you do this? You ask. Why tell me their stories? Why carry them at all if you can't feel anything about them? He's quiet for a long moment. When he speaks, his voice is very soft. Because someone must, he says. Because these people deserve to be more than just security incidents in classified reports. Because even if I cannot mourn them properly, I can ensure they are not forgotten. It is the closest thing to honoring the dead that I am capable of. He looks at you directly, and perhaps, he continues, in telling you these stories, in sharing this burden however briefly before you die, I am proving that somewhere beneath all the engineering and modification and purpose, there remains some fragment of Aaron, some ghost that remembers what it means to value life, what it means to recognize tragedy, what it means to want, however incompletely, to make meaning from loss. The water continues to run, time continues to pass, and you sit in this chamber with this impossible being, surrounded by the ghosts of those who saw what you've seen, and you understand with perfect clarity that you're about to join them. But before you do, before the end comes, there's one more thing you need to know. What happens now? You ask, what are my choices? The custodian closes his eyes briefly, and when he opens them again, there's something new in his expression. Something that might be resignation or might be relief that you've finally asked the question he's been waiting for. Now, he says, we discuss what comes next. The custodian doesn't immediately continue. He sits there, hands resting on his knees, and you have the sense that he's preparing himself. Not physically, his body is always ready, always perfectly controlled, but mentally, as if what comes next requires a different kind of strength. Before we speak of your fate, he says finally, there is something else you must understand. A pattern. The stories I've told you, Veritasia, Hester, Darian, they are not anomalies. They are not isolated incidents across 10 millennia. They are regular, predictable, cyclical. He stands and walks to the chamber's far wall, where you now notice there are inscriptions carved into the stone. They're tiny, almost microscopic, but somehow visible in the golden light. Thousands of them, tens of thousands, names perhaps, or dates, or tallies. Every few decades, he continues, his back to you, someone sees. Palace staff who take wrong turns during emergencies, officials whose curiosity exceeds their wisdom, pilgrims who breach security through devotion or madness, servitors whose programming fails at inopportune moments, children who wander where children should not be. He traces one finger along the wall, following lines of text you cannot read. Each one sees what you have seen, he says. Each one must be dealt with. Each one adds to this wall, to this record that exists only in the most classified archives of the Imperium, a ledger of necessary deaths, a catalog of tragedies repeated across millennia. The scale of it hits you like a physical blow. You'd imagine yourself as an aberration, a unique mistake. But you're not. You're just the latest in an endless line of witnesses who saw the wrong thing at the wrong time. How many? You whisper. Since the heresy alone. He continues tracing the wall. 4,732 confirmed witnesses who saw one of us unhelmed and survived long enough for the situation to require resolution. The number before the heresy is harder to calculate. Record-keeping was different then, and many incidents were handled locally without central reporting. Nearly 5,000 people across 10,000 years who looked upon a custodian's face and died for it. The number is both smaller and larger than you expected. Small enough that it's not a daily occurrence. Large enough that it's a systematic pattern. An accepted cost of maintaining the mystery. Let me tell you about some of them, he says, turning back to you. Not all, that would take days, and we do not have days, but enough that you understand the variations, the different ways this tragedy has played out. He returns to the bench and settles once more into that precise posture. There was a child, he begins, 73 years ago, a girl 6 years old, daughter of a minor administrative official. She wandered away from her father during a tour of the outer palace wings, the sanitized sections where loyal citizens are occasionally granted access. She found a door that had been left unsealed due to a mechanical fault. She followed corridors that grew progressively stranger, more ornate, more impossible. She was looking for a bathroom. Despite everything, despite the horror and the fear and the certain knowledge of your own doom, you feel your heart break a little at that detail. A child who just needed a bathroom. She found my brother, Constantine, he continues. He was in a private meditation chamber, helmetless, engaged in the mental exercises we perform to maintain psychological equilibrium. She pushed open the door and stood there, staring at him. He noticed her immediately. Our awareness is constant, but he didn't move. Didn't startle her. He understood immediately what had happened and what would need to happen next. The custodian's expression shifts minutely. Constantine was one of the eldest of us, he says. He served at the Emperor's side during the Unification Wars. He has killed demons with his bare hands. He has stood against horrors that would shatter mortal minds. But in that moment, facing a 6-year-old child who had seen his face, he hesitated. What did he do? He spoke to her, the custodian says, asked her name. She told him, Sira. He asked if she was lost. She nodded. He asked if she was frightened. She said no. She said he had a pretty face and pretty things weren't scary. Your throat tightens. the innocent cruelty of a child's honesty. Constantine led her back through the corridors, he continues, held her hand, told her stories about the palace to distract her from the strangeness of the architecture, brought her to where her father was frantically searching. He handed her over and explained that she had wandered into a restricted section but was unharmed. The father thanked him profusely. Sira waved goodbye. He pauses. That night Constantine came to the child's quarters, he says. Both she and her father were there. He told them the truth, that Sira had seen something forbidden and that the protocols were clear. The father begged, offered anything, his own life, his service, his eternal silence. Constantine told him the same thing I told you, that intention is insufficient, that the knowledge would leak eventually, that the machinery of security allows for no exceptions. You can barely force the words out. What happened? Constantine asked the father to leave the room, the custodian says, to spare him the memory of what came next. The father refused, said he wouldn't leave his daughter, so Constantine allowed him to stay. He sat with Sira, told her she was very brave and very good, told her she would go to sleep and have beautiful dreams. Then the custodian's voice catches, actually catches, the first time you've heard anything interrupt his perfect control. He made it painless, he finishes. As painless as such things can be. The child felt nothing, knew nothing. One moment she was listening to a story about golden warriors and the emperor's light, and the next she simply wasn't anymore. Tears are streaming down your face again, you can't help it. The image is too vivid, too horrible. The father died next, the custodian continues. He asked only that Constantine make it quick, and that someone remember Sira's name. Constantine granted both requests, and now I carry them both, Sira and her father, whose name was Marcus. I carry the exact pitch of her laughter when Constantine told her the funny parts of his stories. I carry the look in Marcus's eyes as he held his daughter's body. I carry all of it. He's silent for a moment. Constantine has not been the same since, he says quietly. Something in him, cracked, not broken, we do not break easily, but cracked. He performs his duties with the same perfection as always, but there is something in his eyes now, something that wasn't there before, as if by killing that child he finally understood the full weight of what we are, what we do, what we cost. The custodian looks at you directly. Do you see? He asks. Do you understand? It doesn't matter who sees, child or elder, scientist or artist, innocent or guilty. The outcome is always the same. The machinery grinds forward. The necessary evil is enacted. The witnesses are silenced. Then why does it keep happening? You ask, and there's anger in your voice now. Anger cutting through the grief. If it's happened 5,000 times, why hasn't the Imperium fixed whatever allows it to keep happening? Why not make it impossible for people to stumble into these situations? For the first time since this conversation began, the custodian's expression shifts into something that might be bitter amusement. Because the Imperium is vast beyond comprehension, he says. Because the palace alone contains more rooms than can be catalogued, more corridors than can be mapped, more security protocols than can be perfectly maintained. Because servitors malfunction, because officials become complacent, because the machinery of bureaucracy is itself a source of chaos. And because, he pauses, because perfect security would require perfect isolation, and isolation would make us invisible, and invisibility would defeat the purpose of our existence. He leans forward. We must be seen, he says. That is the paradox. We must be visible enough to serve as symbols, to inspire faith, to demonstrate the emperor's power, but not so visible that the truth becomes apparent. We walk a knife's edge between mystery and revelation. And occasionally, inevitably, someone falls off that edge. Someone sees what should not be seen. Like me, you say. Like you, he agrees. Like the servitor who wandered into a restricted armory 200 years ago, its programming corrupted by scrap code, and stood watching as 3 of us removed our helmets during maintenance. Like the inquisitor who, in pursuit of a suspected heretic, breached a chamber where one of us lay wounded and helmetless. like the off-world dignitary whose quarters were accidentally placed adjacent to a section where we train, who heard sounds of combat and investigated, and saw through a window what we look like when we fight without our helms. He stands and begins to pace again, that restless, almost human movement that suggests some deep disturbance beneath the perfect exterior. Each case is different, he continues. Each requires individual assessment. Some are killed immediately. Some are monitored to see if they'll speak, then killed when they do or when it becomes clear they will. Some are memory wiped, their minds invaded by psychers who cut away the offending knowledge like surgeons excising tumors. Some are converted into servitors, their consciousness preserved in a form that can no longer communicate. Some simply disappear, reassigned to distant outposts where they die in tragic but unremarkable accidents. The litany of fates is horrifying in its variety. So many different ways to solve the same problem. So many approaches to the same necessary evil. There was a remembrancer, he says, and you realize he's telling another story. Not Veritasia, a different one centuries later. His name was Gavin Trell. He wrote poetry, magnificent poetry by all accounts. He was assigned to document the daily life of the imperial household, and somehow, through a combination of charm and persistence, he gained access to areas he shouldn't have seen. The custodian stops pacing and stands very still. He never saw a face, he says. That's what makes this story different. He never saw one of us unhelmed, but he saw other things, training sessions, private moments, conversations between custodians that revealed depths of personality that the public image doesn't allow for. He heard us speak of things that mattered to us, small things, human things, fragments of individuality that persist beneath the programming. You wait for him to continue, sensing that this story ends differently than the others. He wrote a poem, the custodian says, called it The Golden Cage. It was about us, about the custodian guard, and it was true, too true. It spoke of souls trapped in perfect bodies, of minds that remembered forgetting, of an existence that was simultaneously eternal and empty, of warriors who protected humanity while being denied humanity themselves. His voice takes on a rhythmic quality, and you realize he's reciting. They stand in gold and silence keep, these guardians who cannot weep, perfected past the human form, forever still, forever warm. They gave their souls to guard the throne and stand eternal and alone. The custodian stands before you, golden armor gleaming like a relic pulled from myth, but nothing about him feels mythical. Not anymore. Not now that you've seen his face. His voice is quiet when he begins, though nothing so immense should be capable of quiet. The poem was never published, he says. Gavin Trell wrote it in secret. The Golden Cage. He believed it honored us, showed the depth of what we sacrificed, but the tribunal ruled otherwise. You watch his jaw tighten. The expression is small, almost human. Trell argued that humanity deserved to know what its defenders had given up, but the Imperium decided our sacrifice must remain abstract. We are meant to inspire awe, not pity. Poetry that humanizes us undermines the symbol. And him, you ask, though you already know. He was given a choice. Recant the poem, denounce it as misunderstanding, and write approved verses, or face execution. A pause. He refused, said truth mattered more than survival, so they killed him, burned every copy of the poem, erased or executed every witness. He looks at you steadily. But I remember it. I read it in the investigation file, and I have carried every word for 600 years. That is when the pattern becomes clear, horrifyingly, sickeningly clear. The Imperium kills witnesses, destroys evidence, sanitizes truth, but the custodians remember. They are the only ones who know the full cost of what they are. You see it now, he says, not asking. 5,000 witnesses over 10 millennia, 5,000 variations of the same tragedy, all dead except in our memories. He settles across from you again, golden light haloing his silhouette. You asked why I burden you with these stories. It is because your death is not personal. You are part of a pattern older than your civilization. I tell you so you'll understand. This isn't cruelty. This is protocol. That doesn't help, you whisper. No, he agrees, but it may help you bear it. He leans forward, elbows on his knees. For a moment, the distance between you and him feels almost bridgeable. The servitor that saw 3 of us die did not understand what it had witnessed. We shut it down without pain. The inquisitor who saw one of us fought because that is what inquisitors do. He misidentified the threat. The dignitary begged and offered bribes. None of it mattered. He lifts his gaze to you. Each death is different. Courage, fear, rage, resignation. I remember all of them. The weight of that memory is almost visible in his posture. Why remember? You ask. If you can't mourn, why not forget? He is silent for a long time. Because someone must, he says finally. If even we forget them, then they truly vanish, become numbers in a log. I will not allow that. I cannot mourn them, but I can carry them. When he meets your eyes, you see something raw beneath the gold. It is the closest thing to humanity I have left. It breaks something in you. To be remembered by a being incapable of grief feels like a softer version of oblivion. I will remember you as well, he says quietly. Your name, your voice, your fear, your anger. I will carry it for as long as I exist. It is not comforting, it is devastating. There is one more story, he says. The most recent before you. His name was Torven Hylos. You nod, unable to speak. A junior administrator, loyal, ordinary, exactly the kind of man the Imperium is built on. He encountered Valorous, our Captain General fresh from battle, helmetless during armor repairs. Torven opened the wrong door during a lockdown. You imagine the moment, Valorous wounded, massive, impossibly real. Torven small, frightened, frozen. Valorous asked him, if I let you leave, could you keep the secret? Torven said no, said it would show in his dreams, his eyes, his behavior, that he would tell his wife, confess to a priest. He was honest. The custodian's voice shifts, shaded by something he cannot name. Most witnesses lie, Torven didn't. So what happened? Valorous gave him the choice you will receive, but first he told Torven everything, how we're made, what we lose, what we remember, what we endure. The custodian pauses. He showed him the scars. And Torven. He understood. He couldn't condone it, but couldn't condemn it either. He said the Imperium is built on impossible choices. A breath. He chose death, quick and clean. He asked only that Valorous tell his family he died honorably. Valorous did. The widow thanked him, and Valorous nearly wept. The custodian watches you. I tell you this because Torven's end was the best outcome possible. He understood. He chose freely. His agency was honored. He rises. The moment of stories is over. We have reached the point where theory becomes practice, he says. You must choose how your story ends. Your heart hammers like it wants to escape your chest. There are 5 options. He holds up a hand. Option 1, clean execution. Instantaneous, painless. Your family will be told it was an accident. They will grieve but honor you. A finger lowers. Option 2, memory erasure. Psychers can remove everything you've seen. You would wake in a med bay believing you suffered a minor injury. Another pause, but the process is imperfect. You may lose more, personality changes, memory holes. You might not be fully yourself. Another finger folds down. Option 3, servitor conversion. You live in a way, your skills preserved, your consciousness destroyed. A third finger falls. Option 4, exile. A black site where all witnesses who cannot be killed are kept. You live, but without family, freedom, or purpose. 4 down, 1 remains. He hesitates before speaking. And the final option, transformation. His voice is almost a whisper. You could become what I am. Your breath freezes. The genetic compatibility for our creation is extraordinarily rare, but you possess it. He takes a small step toward you. Perhaps the strongest compatibility I have seen in 1500 years. Your stomach drops. It would take decades, he says. Decades of agony, surgery, modification, psychological reconditioning. You would forget everything, your name, your family, your memories. You would lose yourself, but you would serve for millennia. You tremble, why offer this? Efficiency, he says honestly. We lose brothers, we must be replaced. Compatible candidates cannot be wasted. Then his tone shifts. And because I have offered this choice to 7 people in 10,000 years, all 7 refused, horrified. But I wonder if any might have chosen differently with more time. He kneels before you again. I cannot advise you, he says. My perspective is warped. Because when I was given this choice, I chose death. You stare, but you am here, he finishes. I was 9. A child cannot consent to death, so they chose for me. They turned my no into yes. The confession hangs in the air like a wound that never healed. For 10,000 years I have lived with that stolen choice. I do not regret my existence. The capacity for regret was removed, but I remember the boy who said no. He places one massive hand gently on your shoulder. I will not take your choice. I will honor whatever you decide. He steps back. So tell me, how do you wish this to end? The chamber is silent except for the trickling water. You think of death, clean, swift, dignified. Of erasure, continuing your life with scars you don't remember. Of servitorhood, existence without self. Of exile, life without living. And of transformation, millennia of service stripped of humanity. There is no good choice, only a true one. You breathe in. I choose. And the universe shifts. If you choose death, it is instant. No pain, no fear, only light fading and the faint, impossible sense that the custodian is grateful you let him honor your agency. If you choose erasure, you wake in a med bay with a gap in your memory and a dread you cannot name whenever a custodian passes by. If you choose servitorhood, your consciousness dissolves, leaving only function. If you choose exile, you live out your days with others who know too much. All of you buried alive for the sake of secrecy. If you choose transformation, the agony begins, decades of it, until you forget everything, including why you said yes. Whichever path you choose, you are carried forward, not by history, not by the Imperium, by him. The custodian walks alone through the palace once more, helmet sealed, the symbol restored. Beneath the mask, the tragedy of his creation is invisible to all, unknowable, untellable, but he remembers you, perfectly, eternally. And somewhere in the impossible vastness of the Imperial Palace, another door will one day open and another witness will see what they should not, and the cycle will begin again. Because in the grim darkness of the far future, nothing ends. Not really. Not ever.